Hi, I'm Jane Sanders, founder of the Sanders Institute. I'm so pleased to be here today with one of our founding fellows, Dr. Stephanie Kelton, who is a professor of public policy and economics at Stonybrook University and has been chief economist in the U.S. Senate Budget Committee.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks for coming. I'm so excited to talk with you.
So now you have just completed a paper about a national jobs guarantee. Tell me how this all started and how you got involved in pursuing this bold initiative.
Well, this has been something that I've been working on. It's been part of my research for my entire academic career. So almost 20 years. It's hard to believe that it's been that long, but this is something that's been important to me for a really long time. And, I remember actually when Senator Sanders called to interview me for the position as chief economist on the Senate Budget Committee. And we had a long conversation, and at one point in the conversation, he asked me, "What would you do if you were me?" And I thought, wow, okay, so I'm Senator Sanders. Well, I get to do something cool and big. What can I do? And I said, the Second Bill of Rights. And he said, tell me. And so we started to talk about FDR. And, for me, this was always kind of like unfinished business for the Democratic Party. This is where FDR left off, putting forward this idea that Americans should be afforded certain fundamental rights, not just the right to health care, which is one of those fundamental rights, but a right to an education and a right to employment. And it goes on and on. And, in fact, FDR put the right to employment first on the list. It was his top item on the agenda. And so it's something I've been working on for a very long time. And it goes straight to the heart of the Democratic Party, or at least it did at one time.
Mm-hmm. Why don't we start with what is happening in America today and why we should be doing it now? A lot of economists will be saying that we're at full employment, near the 2008 pre-crisis state, that the recovery is going on quite well, 15 million jobs created since the crisis. Why now?
Yeah, it's a question people do ask, and there are a couple of different ways that I would answer that. One is, what better time, in some sense, than to put in place a program that will work as a safeguard for the next crisis when it comes along. So, our economy goes through cycles. There are good times, and the good times are followed by bad times. And fortunately, we always recover from the bad times. But, the last recession that we had was the worst on record since the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. And because we don't have a program like this in place, our economy suffered in ways that it never would have had to suffer if we had programs like this one in place to absorb people when they lose their jobs, when the economy turns down. Instead of throwing millions of people into the unemployment lines and having a recovery that's so slow because people lose their job, they lose their income, and the economy doesn't recover and it doesn't recover. It took us 9 years to claw back the jobs that were lost in the Great Recession. And if we had a program that took people when the economy turns down, and instead of saying you're going to be unemployed for a while, maybe a really long while, we took them in and we employed them right away, because we know that employers, the last person they want to hire is the unemployed person. They want people who are already working. They want to hire off the top. They don't want to hire off of what they perceive to be the bottom. Somebody who hasn't been working, doesn't have a record to draw on to show that they've been actively doing something. And so a program like this is a safeguard for people, and it's a safeguard for the economy as well. So you're right. People will look at this economy and they'll say, this is full employment. Except for 17 million or so Americans, this isn't full employment. Yes. You've got people who are officially unemployed, the people that everyone pays attention to, those official unemployed folks. But then you've got lots of people who are stuck in part-time jobs who really want full-time work, but they can't have it because their bosses won't give them hours to make them full-time workers, so they lack the income that they really want, and they lack the benefits that go often with full-time work. And then you've got lots and lots of people, millions, in fact, of Americans who got discouraged. They gave up. They dropped out of the labor force, and they're no longer looking for work. But if you ask them, would you like a job, and would you take a job tomorrow if it were available to you, they'll say, I absolutely would. So you're looking at 16 to 17 million people who are just forgotten and left behind, even in an economy that many economists will look at and tell you is full employment.
Right. Many of the underemployed just never show up in the data, or the people that are stuck in jobs that they really don't want or that are way below what their expertise can offer. It sounds like you're talking about another WPA.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the model. I mean, I think in the 21st century, we have to go beyond where FDR was in the 1930s, 1940s. But it would be modeled on the WPA, something massive in scale, where the government puts people to work doing a variety of projects. I think a lot of times when people hear WPA, they think roads and bridges and that sort of thing. And that can certainly be part of a program like this. The CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, was another New Deal program, right? And that dealt in many ways with environmental concerns. The NYA, the National Youth Administration, was one of the alphabet soup programs in the New Deal, and that's jobs programs for youth. So we have very high unemployment rates for young people in this country. We have an environmental catastrophe. There are ways to put people to work caring for our planet, caring for one another, rebuilding roads and infrastructure, and caring for our community. So, you can think very imaginatively, the way they did in the WPA, where people were performing public theater, the arts were part of it, recording oral histories. I mean, it isn't just a shovel and something to fill in a road. We can think very, very creatively about the kinds of jobs we want to create for people in the 21st century.
So for those of us who might not understand a national jobs program, give it to us in a nutshell.
So the idea would be that anyone who wants to work and contribute but can't find any way to do that in the economy has a place to go. And so you can imagine taking the unemployment offices that exist all over this country today and just taking the U and the N off of the sign and turning them into employment offices. So it's a one-stop shopping kind of a thing. Person walks in and says, I'm looking for work. And they sit down and they talk with someone and they find out, what kind of experience do you have? You don't want to take someone who's got skills that could be used in one way and put them into employment where you're not kind of getting the benefit that you could from their own experience and training. And so you're fitting the job to the worker, and you're allowing the worker and the community to have a say in what it is that people are going to be put to work to do. And you can be as flexible as you want. You can make work part-time to accommodate people who have other, maybe they're going to school, maybe they have a child, maybe they want some hours but not a full-time job. Other people want full-time work, and you've got to make sure that those jobs are available for people who want them.
And what would you do in terms of wages? People are going to jobs at $8 an hour, no benefits right now. They're working. How would you approach it? How would this work?
So what we did in this study was go really big. And we took an ambitious wage and benefit package. And we said what we believe is that anyone who's working full-time in America should not be living in poverty. And that means choosing a wage that will allow a family of 3 or 4 to have one person working and to pull that family out of poverty. So we start at $15 an hour. And then we said, you know what, we want not just a living wage, but we want people to have some benefits as well. So we offer a package that includes a $15 an hour minimum wage, and then we costed out some benefits. It would be up to the community and government in the process of implementing this, whether that looks like paid family leave, whether it looks like sick pay, whether it's vacation, what those benefits are could be determined later, but we also said it ought to include health care. And so we included that in the cost of this program. So we really did go big, and we did it on purpose because we wanted to be able to demonstrate that you could do something of this magnitude that would employ 15 to 20 million Americans at any point in time in the business cycle and pay them a living wage and provide benefits that include health care and do it in a way that improves the overall economic condition as well as lifting millions of people out of poverty and children as well.
I appreciate how you think, Stephanie, because too many people aim low, and unfortunately they achieve that, and then they think that's enough. Yeah. So what you're talking about is actually 2 of the 3 progressive pillars of progressive policy right now: Medicare for all, or health care for everybody, $15 minimum wage. Now you add in 100% renewable energy, and that could work in your infrastructure program. And we've got a very good foundation for people to have a happy life, a healthy living. just like FDR talked about.
Exactly right. And a big part of what we envision is a green economy, that we are transitioning toward a cleaner, more sustainable future where many of the kinds of jobs that we're talking about as part of this program would be oriented toward building that kind of a future.
It sounds very, very intriguing, and I would think that a lot of people would be extremely interested in it. And then there will be the detractors who say, we can't afford it. How can this happen? And we'll probably confuse it with a basic income. So can you talk a little bit about the difference between those two programs?
What FDR had in mind, and what we do in this paper, is we say what we want to do is guarantee a right to employment to anyone who wants work and can't find it elsewhere in the economy. So this isn't something that directly touches everyone. This is something that directly touches only those who are currently not working, but who want work. And so, a universal basic income is something that you're hearing, I think, more and more people talk about. And this is something that would touch everyone, at least if that's the way they truly envision it. It's universal in nature. So imagine, this is what people say. They say the future of work is uncertain. The robots are coming. There isn't going to be enough work for people to do. And so we've got to figure out how, in a future in which we don't really need people doing much of anything because the robots will do it, but what businesses definitely know that they need are customers. And so the solution to their problem is just send everybody a check and tell them to go shopping, right? You don't have anything to do all day. You're going to be really depressed and you're going to be lonely. You're not going to feel a sense of connection to the community or the broader, world in which we operate. But that's okay. You stay home and we'll send you a check. And don't forget to go shopping, because at the end of the day, corporations still want to make a profit on whatever it is these robots are producing. And that's the universal basic income. It's money that goes, at least the way they normally describe it, everyone gets a check. Now, here's what concerns me about this proposal. A number of things. First, if you say that you're going to provide a check at a living wage, and sometimes they'll say $30,000 a year. Okay, everybody gets $30,000 a year. It's free money. It sounds great, but that means you get it, and I get it, and Bill Gates gets it, and Oprah Winfrey gets it. Everybody gets their $30,000. Now, you said, how do you pay for it, or something along those lines. The people who push this scheme often say, well, we're going to cut all the other programs. We're going to eliminate health care, Medicare, Medicaid. We're going to cut food stamps. We're going to cut all the social safety programs that are there today. And we're just going to give everybody a check and say, figure it out. Don't forget to save for your retirement because Social Security's gone. Don't forget to put aside some money in case you have a health emergency. Don't forget to say, so it's up to you, right? So while the middle class and the poor are struggling to figure out how to deal with, the loss of all these other programs, and they've got their $30,000, the rich are doing what? Take their $30,000 and they buy shares of stock, right? Or they buy, some other asset that's going to appreciate over time. So you say we have income and wealth inequality that looks like this. Actually, my hands won't go high enough, right? But it looks like this. And the UBI, the basic income, gives everybody $30,000. And so you would think it does nothing to diminish the inequality, but my concern is it actually exacerbates the inequality. Why? Because the rich are going to invest and their wealth is going to grow as a result of this, and the poor are going to eat their apples, not buy shares of Apple.
Right, and it will still be looked at as a welfare program, as a giveaway, as an entitlement, which will be cut at some point.
Exactly right.
And it's diminishing the person that gets it. I mean, everybody wants to work for their livelihood. They want to contribute to society. And as you said, staying at home and just collecting a check is not very, it's sometimes very debilitating. So
yeah. I mean, there are examples. People will often point to Alaska and they say, well, in Alaska, people get a check, they get a dividend. Well, right, but it's not a living wage. It's a modest check. Maybe it's $1,200, $1,400, and it varies depending upon oil revenues, right?
Yeah.
And there are other countries that do something like this, a citizen dividend, something like that.
Sure.
That could be a fine thing to do, to sort of top up the incomes of people on a periodic basis. But to eviscerate the social safety nets that exist today on the promise that that, don't worry, we're going to send you a check. Guess what's going to be the first thing that gets cut by the next Congress as soon as it passes?
Right.
It's going to be the free money, because that's the last thing, that the perception is going to be, well, why are we sending free money? We have to cut that. And meanwhile, you will have given up Social Security and Medicare. Everything else will have been lost. So I definitely prefer the idea of going in with a bottom-up program, and that's what the federal job guarantee would be. It aims directly at the people who need it most and gets the unemployed. It lifts their wages, and so it reduces income and wealth inequality simply by raising the floor, right? And so it addresses that problem and avoids the problem of exacerbating inequality.
Let me play devil's advocate a bit. For the people that are unemployed, they don't have any training. Do you have much training involved in this?
We envision that. So there can be, for certain workers, right? You got to kind of learn something about the worker. This is not a cookie cutter kind of a program. So if there's someone that you feel with some specialized training, apprenticeships, that sort of a thing, those programs should be available and part of this program. If you can transition a worker quickly from this kind of employment back into private sector or other types of employment with some skill upgrades or minimal sorts of investments, then that certainly makes sense to us. But what you don't want to do is train people for jobs that don't exist.
Right.
You don't want to set them up for failure. And you don't want to say, the reason that you're unemployed is because there's something wrong with you. You're lacking, you're deficient. And then you change the worker in certain ways and you send them back out there and they fail again. And the problem isn't the worker, the problem is the economy itself. There's something wrong with the system that can't generate employment for everybody in the economy. And that's the problem that we have and have always had, and quite frankly will always have. In a market economy, a certain segment of the population will always be unuseful, in the sense that private employers don't want to hire all of the labor that wants to work. And so you've got to figure out how to deal with that. Do you just allow them to sit unemployed and you send them unemployment compensation, or do you do something else that gives them a better shot, makes better use of them, brings them in, is more inclusive, makes them feel part of the economy, and allows them to contribute? Because you're right, they would rather contribute than sit home and collect a check.
Yeah, in some countries, the government, the industry, and the unions get together and they actually plan in advance what the needs are for the country, for the industry, and train people so that they don't go through the pain of getting these pink slips and then they're out of work and then they have to go look for work. But they plan ahead and say, okay, we're going to retrain you while you have this job, which is going to be obsolete at some point. We're going to train you for this future job. Have you envisioned anything like that?
I think that is definitely part of what we envision, because again, as you transition toward green energy, you're going to have workers with different skill sets. And as we close coal plants and transition away from fossil fuels, we're going to need workers with a different skill set, okay? And so some of what you can have people doing in this program is retraining in a way that prepares them for the kind of work around which you want to center your economic activity.
Okay, we've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about renewables. You also mentioned caring for elders, for children, teachers' aides. Again, devil's advocate, how are you going to vet the job seekers to make sure that our children and our elders are safe and that they are qualified to take care of them?
Good question, and an important concern, right? You definitely want to be careful about the kinds of people that you're putting into facilities where children and elderly folks, and so you do it the way you do it today. Background checks, careful scrutinization of an individual's prior employment record and history, job referrals, references, you take every precaution that you can. But, our schools, our nurseries, our elder facilities, they're woefully understaffed. And so what you want are people working alongside. You want aides, you want an extra pair of hands in the room. And so there's going to be lots of oversight.
Okay, let's talk about the economy. Can you tell me what positive effects there would be on the economy, whether or not it would affect state and local budgets? And then, as a counterweight, what negative effects might there be? And how would you mitigate them?
So if we were to do this in the way that we look at in the paper, which again is really ambitious, right? what we find is that employing 15 to 19 million people puts additional income into that many people's hands, which then the most of that gets spent into the economy, which through secondary effects has, positive spillover to the economy, right? I get a job, I currently don't work, now I have a job and I have an income, I go out and I spend. Now some restaurant gets, some revenue that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise, some profit. So they hire another busboy. And you know how the multiplier works in economics, you get a benefit to the economy as a whole. So our research says that this kind of program would add $500 to $600 billion a year on average to real GDP. So it's a real shot in the arm for the economy. And of course, if you take 15 million or so people and give them an income that they then start spending into the economy, you would expect a pretty significant boost to economic activity. The concern would be, but what if you overheat things? What if all of that spending is just too much and the economy can't accommodate all of that additional demand? Then you'd end up with an inflation problem, which would be potentially disastrous depending on how bad it got. But what we were able to show is that there's so much slack in the economy today. Businesses are operating with all kinds of extra unused capacity. There's plenty of room to ramp up demand without creating an inflation problem. People will say the economy is close to full employment, but if you actually look at how much spare capacity there is, we can fill a huge void, adding to real GDP, raising incomes, boosting economic output with a modest increase in inflation. And so that's what we would be looking at. That would be the risk.
How much will this cost?
Well, it depends how many people take it up, but our estimates are between 1.5% of GDP and 3% of GDP. So it's really fairly modest. If you think you're getting 15 million or so people employed at $15 an hour with benefits and health care, and you say, and it costs only 1.5% of our national GDP, that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, it sounds like you're talking about trickle across rather than trickle down, and it would be great to have these things be discussed at the table when they're talking about tax cuts, which will cost just as much for the top 1% instead of helping the economy and helping the average American.
Exactly. That's exactly right. We're already talking about doing something big and ambitious. The problem is we're talking about doing it for the people who are already extremely well off. And so the tax cuts that are being pushed on the Hill right now overwhelmingly benefit those at the very top. But the price tag is not dissimilar. So if you say, well, we're willing to do $1.5 trillion, right, adding to the deficit in order to do tax cuts, what else could we do? If we're willing to do that, what else could we do? And this is the kind of thing, if you were comparing it side by side, which one has the greater potential to boost employment, to raise wages, all the things that they tell us the tax cuts are going to do, they're going to lead to job creation and wages are going to go up and all this kind of stuff. Side by side, this is clearly the plan that gets you there most directly.
Stephanie, this is a very ambitious plan, and it is something that we should be talking about. As you said, across from other issues, I find very difficult is that too often people are on the defensive and saying, no, we can't do that. That's terrible, but never offering ambitious ideas. We're setting our sights much lower and accepting much less. You have to give the Republicans something right now that they are being bold. They're wrong, in my opinion, but they're being bold, and we need to do that much more effectively.
Yeah, it's funny. They're selling, in terms of the way they're marketing this, it's very optimistic, and it is very ambitious, and they're saying what we have isn't good enough. And we can grow faster. We can have 3.5%, we can have 4% growth, we can have more jobs, we can have higher wages. And people like the way that sounds. And, it sounds better than someone, I think, saying the economy's already at full employment. This is as good as it gets. What are you talking about, So the minimum wage in this country isn't $7.25 an hour. The minimum wage is $0. because that's the wage that people get if they're unemployed. They don't get $7.25 an hour. They get zero. And a program like this makes the minimum wage a genuine minimum wage. It becomes the de facto minimum wage for everyone. The least you can get if you're willing to work is $15 an hour.
This idea, I mean, might be your brainchild in terms of putting together this whole approach, but it seems to be in the ether now. I mean, a number of people are coming out and saying we need a national jobs program. So tell our audience about some of the folks that are coming out. They're unlikely, and so that's a good sign.
Some are unlikely, that is for sure. You know, my colleagues and I have been working on this for a long time, but there are others, and they're important. I'd like to just mention a couple of them. One is an economist at Duke University. His name is Sandy Darity, William Sandy Darity. And he frequently co-authors with another economist from the New School named Derek Hamilton. And Derek Hamilton and Sandy Darity have been just relentless champions for a federal job guarantee for so many years, and they were finally recognized by Politico this year as one of the Politico 50. So one of the 50 people who are most having an impact on the political discourse. So that was a pretty big deal in terms of getting that kind of on the national stage. But more recently, Kevin Hassett, who is the current president of the Council of Economic Advisors, made comments that what he believes that we need is a New Deal. Now, these are
And
Kevin
that's the
Hassett's.
Trump administration.
Yes, this is Donald Trump's appointee to be the head of the Council of Economic Advisors. And so his economic advice includes, in part, maybe we should revise the New Deal and start thinking about federal government directly employing people. Now, this is pretty crazy stuff from a party that is, known for telling us the government can't create jobs. And here's a guy saying, actually, we should be creating jobs directly. And so that's Kevin Hassett, one. And then just days later, Bob Rubin, who was Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton. Rubin writes an op-ed in the New York Times, and he makes the case for a federal funded job program. And he says it ought to be at a living wage, it ought to include benefits, and it should be open to the formerly incarcerated, right? It should include. So this is really crazy stuff, bipartisan. You've got a Democrat, former, Democratic administration, current Republican administration, both of them talking about the need to, and this is in an economy in which many people say we're at full employment. And this is when this conversation is taking place. So people are starting to think, what are we going to do to ensure? And I think it has maybe something to do with this populist kind of bubbling up, that people are sensing that something's not right. And we have to begin to address. And if this is going to require fundamental change in the way that we organize work in this country to ensure that people have opportunities, and we have to just build it into the system, it's got to be baked in that you have a right to come in and get a job. And we're not going to leave you out. We're not going to leave you behind. We're going to create the work for you. If the economy doesn't offer it, we'll make sure that you have it. And it's coming from some pretty unlikely places right now.
That sounds hopeful.
It does.
I think that any of us can look around our communities and see that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and this seems to be a good answer. I hope that we will be able to create a public space for discussion and debate on this ambitious idea and have the policymakers really take it seriously. I think one of the things that's difficult is always to try to get beyond the first initial response, which is, oh, that's too progressive, or that is going to cost too much. So join me in helping create that space, and thank you so much for your ongoing work on the economy.
Thank you very much, Jane.